Hi everyone, welcome back to 33 Founders. We have a really special episode for you today with Nicholas Brussid, the co-founder and COO of BlaBlaCar. Thanks so much for joining us, Nicholas.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Can we start out with you sharing how you're enabling people to travel?
Yeah, so maybe I should describe a bit what we do actually, and what's the foundation of BlaBlaCar. So the company actually started back in 2009, actually formed in 2006, but we really launched and started operation in 2009. And the promise of BlaBlaCar was to create this marketplace between drivers and passengers to travel between cities. So at a very basic level, as a driver, you would go on BlaBlaCar and you would say, hey, I'm traveling from, let's say, Paris to Brussels this weekend, and I happen to have 3 empty seats in my car. And then you would share those empty seats with passengers going the same way. So we started that really in France initially, and then we realized that this sort of city-to-city ride-sharing was actually not done at all, actually, in most countries, actually in Europe, and was actually not done in any country or pretty much in the world. So very quickly, it's pretty unique, actually, when you start something and you realize that, hey, it seems to work. I mean, people are actually doing that city-to-city ride-sharing, and no one else is doing that at a global scale. So very quickly, we decided to expand, and we went into Spain, into the UK, into all over Europe, and most recently into Russia. And today, we have over 9 million members actually over Europe and Russia, actually sharing rides in their car between cities all over Europe and Russia, and we keep expanding.
One of the things I want to talk about first is when I first learned about BlaBlaCar, I had to reach out to you because I couldn't stop thinking of the name. And then I learned that there's a lot of strategy behind the name. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it started with a different name, actually. So it started with a very descriptive name when we started in France, which was covoiturage, which literally means ride sharing. So it was like being called ridesharing.com or something similar. And at the beginning, it's sort of quite useful from an SEO point of view. People find you online, and at least it says what it does. But then we realized that actually the name itself had very low value and was kind of misunderstood. And we realized also it was not a brand, right? So it's like a car being called car or a fridge being called fridge. And we also realized, like, when people were using the early adopters, were using the service, we had some early competitors that had very similar names. It was like, you had ride sharing and e-ride sharing and shareyourride.com and stuff like that. All of that in French on the French market. And when we asked the early adopters, like, which website have you used, they could never quite remember the name. So they said, oh, one of those ride-sharing website. And then when we asked them more questions about, like, what was the color of the website, what was the logo and stuff like that, they could barely remember anything. But they could remember one thing, which was one product feature we had in the early days, which was the talkative index. So it was telling you, like, how talkative you are in a car. And we had something saying, I would smoke, not smoke, and I would do a detour, no detour. And we had something saying, I don't want to talk, I'm a blah. I'm sort of normal, I'm a blah blah. Or I want to engage in a social experiment, and I'm a blah blah blah. And people found that pretty funny. And in fact, we realized that was one of the things that people wanted to know is, like, do I need to talk or not if I ride share with other people? So then we decided to rebrand actually the company BlaBlaCar. And if you use the service, you understand why, because every time you sign up, or when you use the service, when you book a car, if the driver is very talkative or not. So it was kind of a funny angle, and also it's a very differentiating name, right? So we realized that by having, like, clearly a funky name, you end up essentially talking about your brand a lot more than if you have, like, a boring descriptive name. But it came from the community, right, initially, which is very interesting.
Well, it's stuck in my head, so it works.
Exactly.
So you guys recently raised $100 million of funding, and that's the largest in France. So first of all, congratulations. And you really spearheaded that. And I was so intrigued because I learned that you started out wanting to raise $27 million. You came to the States and suddenly the interest was huge. Everybody wanted to be a part of this. How did your co-founders and you pivot to raise such a larger amount?
Yeah, so we started with, in a way, we had no real amount in mind, right? So we started, and I think that's the best way to do it, is to have a discussion and to take feedback from investors, from other companies, And as we were doing the fundraising, we could see the service exploding. And the other thing that happened is to me, which was very symbolic, is we launched Russia actually early this year, and that was the first time we actually launched an emerging market. If you want to call Russia an emerging market, but it was outside of Europe, so it was a very interesting proof point to say, well, is it a European, sort of Western European phenomenon, or is it more of a global phenomenon? And Russia was, it's structurally different, it's culturally different than Europe, and we've seen like a massive takeoff in Russia,
Fast
today,
too.
very very fast. Even though we had like a very small team on the ground, I mean, we had 2 people literally in Moscow, and today we have over 500,000 Russians actually on the service after something like 6 months or not even, and it keeps accelerating. So we realized like, hey, it's what we do in these markets actually in Russia, and I think what we could do to Latin America, what we could do to Turkey, Middle East, what we could do to lots of countries in Asia, and we talk about like massive markets, in terms of like potential for city-to-city travel, is actually a lot more fundamental than what we've been doing in Europe, right? In a sense that in
It
Europe,
didn't even
actually,
exist in the other places.
exactly, in Europe, in a way, I mean, if I look at France or Germany or the UK or frankly, almost any country in Europe, actually ground transport is pretty good. You have trains, you have buses, runs pretty well, but it's a bit expensive. So BlaBlaCar is just adding like a new sort of cheap and cheerful alternative, and it works really well. And if you come to some of these other markets, actually, the transport landscape is very different. And sometimes, some cities are very poorly connected or not really connected. So what we do is more fundamental. Actually, to some of these countries, actually, we bring a transport network that was not there and completely inefficient. Forget even low cost, right? Completely inefficient before we started. And as we realized that in the funding process, and as we talked to investors, we came to realize, and obviously, like investors, we came to realize why actually the potential of BlaBlaCar is far bigger than we even thought, actually, because it's not just about like you're replacing and shifting an existing transport activity to BlaBlaCar. It's actually creating something new in some of these markets. And when you start thinking like that, and you start thinking like, okay, I need to launch all these countries very fast, and potentially we're talking about having like hundreds of millions of members in a few years, then I think you need to fund that ambition, right? So it was sort of a natural discussion that led to this much bigger round in a way, right? So it's for us. For us, it was very interesting to go through that process. And it felt quite natural. So it was not like a step function where one day we said, well, it's not 27, it's like 100. It just happened that
pretty nice feeling.
Hey, we can. That's what we can and should deploy if we want to make this thing global.
So you've touched on it a little bit, Nicholas, and I want to talk about it a little bit more as your expansion model. What you guys have done so far in a few of your newer countries is you acquire smaller companies in countries that you're interested in, and you use them to build that next branch. Can you tell us more about your expansion strategy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've done exactly what you described, and in a way it's a bit different. I mean, I guess we're not the only company doing that, but it's a bit different from what US companies or other companies have done. And to me, it's also a requirement of being a European company, because you start with one market, which is not really Europe. Actually, it's either France for us, it might be Germany or UK for some other guys. And then you need to already expand within your own market, which is Europe. So you don't have like one market in Europe that has the critical mass of the US, where you can build like already a big company, and then naturally you already have like, you're already the biggest player in the space, and then you go expand internationally. So we thought the best way to do that was to do that with local teams. So today we end up, it's a bit of a strange set, I mean, not strange, but unusual setup. At least it was a few years ago, where we had 7 teams out of less than 100 people. And it was the product of like acquiring these local teams. So we decided, like, as of today, we've done 4 acquisitions, which again is pretty unusual for and we decided to really favor like local autonomy and local teams. And we thought that the best way to do that was seeing like who's doing that on the ground, who's really passionate about that stuff on the ground and acquiring these guys into the BlaBlaCar story and giving them like lots of autonomy locally to fine tune, the marketing message, the positioning, the communication of BlaBlaCar, but trying to build this universal product.
That's what I wanted to talk to you about, your marketing strategies as well, because I think sometimes you think Europe, oh, it's going to be one marketing strategy. Well, of course it's not. It's a lot of different countries. Do you market based on country? Do you have the team, like you said, who's there in charge of that?
Yeah, so it's a lot. I mean, for us, the marketing effort is it's a lot of education, right? So we need to actually educate people to our activity. So if I look at like France initially, but then when we went to Spain and so on, actually people were not doing the city to city ride sharing. There's not even a word for it, right? So it's not like you go on Google and you say, well, let's capture all the people looking for that. People are not even looking for that. People were not doing that. So you need to actually educate the market. And then as you do that, you realize that so you have a few things that are pretty, like within Europe, that would be, I would say, pretty common to all markets. So the fact that you'll be building low cost transport and all of that, it's pretty common, I would say, to Europe. It's different in other countries, by the way, outside of Europe, but very common in Europe. But then the way you articulate that to a German or an Italian or a French or a Brit is different,
of course.
And the only way you get that right is by having the best people locally that understand the market, and we tell you like, hey, that's the way you need to position that in Germany, and that's the way you need to position that in Spain. And again, like the best people to do that are entrepreneurs who wanted to do that in those countries, joining us and solving the problem locally. So in a way, we solve the problem many times locally to build this global solution.
So far, have you guys had one marketing strategy that's worked above all others?
Not really. I mean, there is no, when you do this education marketing or educational marketing, I should say, there is no like magic wand where you find like one.
If only.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise we would not be alone, I guess. So you realize that you need like many touch points. So education goes through social networks, it goes through standard advertising, it goes through PR, it goes through like knowing your community. So we do lots of community events. So we meet our members very, very often. We go to festivals, we go to lots of like events where we can actually meet people, understand their need, and so on and so on. So it's I would say it's it's like having all these signals that really help the education of the market. But there is no like, I hope there was actually, but there is no like magic marketing channel.
Something also, Nicholas, what you just touched on is you try your best to interact with users a lot. And I was curious how you guys approach that, because they can really get on the site, get what they need done, have a great experience, and leave. You guys don't have to interact with them. So how do you approach that and make that connection?
Yeah, so actually you make a very interesting point, which is in a way we enable people, because if you think of BlaBlaCar, one feature that's very interesting is we actually people meet online and they interact offline, which is pretty rare actually for online companies, where typically you do the opposite, right? You take an offline activity like e-commerce, buying shoes. Now you don't need to go to a shop anymore. You buy shoes online, and you don't need to meet anyone anymore. We almost do the opposite in transport, right? So today, the way you would travel, if you fly or if you take the train, you're not going to meet people. If you take BlaBlaCar, you're actually going to meet people. So inherent in the activity, we have this notion of bringing people together. So then, it's I would say it's very natural and easy within community event to say, hey, you've become an ambassador on the service. So we have this ranking where you start as a beginner, and as you use the service more and more, you become an ambassador. We say, hey, we coming to your city. So by the way, one thing we do is what we call the BlaBla tour all over Europe, and next year we do that in Russia, where actually our community managers of all the countries go all over Europe. We've done, I think, 50 stops during the summer.
Wow. In
every city. And we say, okay, we're going to be at this city, and we have this event where we just want to meet members. And I think every event we had between 30 and 100 people, probably on average more than 50 people.
That's great.
So if you think of like, how many people we met, it's like, hundreds or close to maybe 1,000 plus actually during the summer, maybe even thousands actually. And they share their experience and so on. But again, the fact that the activity itself brings people together, and you end up actually 2, 3, 4, 5 people actually in a car for a couple of hours, sometimes more, together, doing this community event is pretty natural for people. So we never had like an issue whenever we go through Facebook and we say, hey, we have an event in XYZ city, we have a huge turnout.
So do you think that's because you have taken that initiative, like you said, with BlaBlaCar to meet online, but then take it offline?
Yeah, I think we have to because our activity. If you think of the experience of a user, even though for us, like building the product, building the marketing strategy, and all of that, everything takes place online. But now, if you think of the user experience, the online experience is going to be like 5 or 10 minutes actually looking for a ride, finding a driver, vetting the profiles, accepting, refusing a ride. So it may be like 10, 15 minutes. But then that person is going to have to go to a pickup point, meet someone, spend like 3 or 4 hours in a car, being dropped off. So there is like a whole offline experience. And that offline experience, we sort of capture through like feedbacks and ratings and stuff like that. But part of the stories we don't, it's harder to capture unless you meet people. So clearly that's what we try to extract. We try to extract like the 90 or 95% of the time of the service, which is actually spent offline in the real world, right?
And part of the rides is a 12% journey charge, the commission that's applied to them. And you started out doing it in France and then you added it to other countries later on. How
Yes.
did you approach the customers when you were adding that into the model?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And it's true that every market we started without.
Mm-hmm.
And the main reason initially is we want to focus on usage. The first step should always be create value. So make sure people engage with your product in the most simple way without any friction. And that's what we've done in every country. And then over time, we had this payment method. And the payment method is actually adding lots to the service. I mean, for one thing, it adds actually trust, right? Because suddenly you have payment, you have bank account. It adds reliability because suddenly I already paid my $20 and I already paid and I'm more likely to come. So what we found is in the early community, it's all about like education and creating the first early adopters. And then as you grow your market and as you get to the million type people, you need to add like more trust and safety features, more reliability features, and payment becomes necessary. So the transition has always been like very natural because it adds so much benefit actually to pay online once you introduce the online payment that it just makes sense.
That's great. And I want to talk about your growth strategy as well. Not many companies grow 200% every year with 9 million users. What's the secret in the BlaBlaCar recipe?
Yeah, so today I would say if you step back and you think of like the sharing economy, what's interesting is when we started, there was no sharing economy. No one was talking about the sharing economy. So they thought like, oh,
Not
okay,
anymore.
and not anymore. So it's interesting because back then it was it's like hitchhiking online, and of course if you think of that as hitchhiking online, you're not going to get the type of growth and scale we reach today. And then they realized, and in a way, the sharing economy and all the press and all the understanding and in a way all the education around the space has helped us. So today, when we in the existing countries and in new countries, I think people see us very differently from where we were like 3 years ago. So in a way, I would say naturally it's getting easier in terms of like education of the market. And then the other thing is, as we talked about earlier, we adding more and more countries. So in a way, if you start with a footprint of 2 or 3 countries, and then you have 12, and then you have 15, and then you have 20, and you have these sort of new countries kicking in, you actually accelerate your growth. So today it's just because I would say the fact that we're still growing at that rate, and I think we're still going to grow at those very fast rate, is the market we tackle is very large. So today we see that in France, we're still growing a lot, actually, very rapidly. We're still doubling year on year, actually, in France. And you're adding all these new markets. And when you talk about like, Latin America, when you talk about India or, Russia, which is just massive. So you have this potential for tap into this very large market, which is people actually going city to city. And, if you look at like the number of people going to city, it's already huge. Mm-hmm. And not only that, actually, what we do is we tend to increase demand because when you offer like lower price, like between on the route, actually, it makes it possible. It's possible because it's cheaper. It makes it possible because it was not even there. It becomes possible. So not only we tap into a very large market of city to city travel, we also expand that market. So So I think and I hope we keep we'll see some pretty explosive growth for the next few years.
I think you guys certainly will. And at the moment, you don't really have too much competition because not like you there, there's Uber and there's Lyft, but your model is so different. And fortunately, you guys have been able to keep away from anything legal, so you don't have anything interfering with your growth. One of the things I'm really curious about is so you don't have, like I said, that competition. How do you maintain that competitive and underdog mentality to drive the company forward? Because I know you've said that your biggest goal is to be on the billboard in NYC.
So it's a very good question actually, and you're right because it's I mean in a way we don't have competition, yes and no. I mean to me like education, I mean it's not competition is a huge challenge, right? So when you see new markets and the way we need to crack new markets, it's been a huge challenge for us, right? So we had to experiment a lot to understand like okay, what are the ingredients we need to do in the product marketing, in the communication mix, so that we educate people and we create those new markets. So we had to innovate a lot on that. And then the other thing is how you think, because today we don't have like you're right that we don't really have like a direct competitor.
It's not like Uber and Lyft
Mostly,
who are butting heads.
it's not like yeah exactly. It's maybe not like Uber and Lyft, but in a way even for Uber, and Lyft, I think they're expanding the market for the most part. So it's true that they're competing, and you're and we're competing with anyone, but they're also expanding the market. So today, like our challenge, and I think the drive we get through the company, it's not like through competition. So it's not like we think like, okay, we need to beat these guys and we need to cut them, we need to cut the price and we need to do this and we need to do that. It's more like, okay, how do we get the next million users in that country that are not aware of BlaBlaCar, and why are they not using BlaBlaCar, and what can we do for BlaBlaCar? So it's a different kind of drive. And in a way, you end up innovating in a different way. I think in both cases, you need to innovate. It's competition or education, but today we tend to be more on the education focus and the competitive focus.
So no matter what, you maintain that underdog mentality, period.
Yeah, I think we do, and it's also a function of like the thing we talked about earlier when you acquire entrepreneurs actually. So if I look at the way we launched, we acquired a company actually in Ukraine. Of all places, we acquired a company in Ukraine to launch Russia, and almost in the middle of the crisis there. But clearly you acquire someone who has that underdog mentality. It was an entrepreneur wanting to really change the way people travel in Ukraine and Russia, wanting to do what we do. So in a way, like I think we also keep it to the people we hire and the values of the company, where if you hire entrepreneurs that share the same value and want to change the world the way we wanted to change the world, you keep that underdog mentality in new countries, and then they feed that back to us in a way. So they re-energize, I would say, the old.
Sounds like a good plan. And one of my favorite things, and something I admire your team so much for, Nicholas, is you said that, of course you have this amazing idea for global expansion and you're already achieving it. But above that, you want to be the best company to work for. I really admire that. And I would want to know, how do you make every employee feel like they're an owner, like BlaBlaCar is their company?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think we're fortunate in the sense that what we do makes sense, right? So we see that we attract lots of employees that actually are entrepreneurs wanting to start their company and want to have an impact and a positive. And the great thing about BlaBlaCar is it's very virtuous in many ways, right? So if you think like socially it makes sense, we enable important countries. Economically, it makes sense. From a sustainable angle, it makes tons of sense because you make like a much better use of the car as it's ever been done, right? If you look at car occupancy in Europe, I think on average like 1.6 people per car, so it's like a driver and on average 0.6 passenger. US is probably same or even worse in terms of like cars being empty. BlaBlaCar is something like 2.7 or 2.8 per car. So essentially, it's a way to say, okay, you make the car a lot more efficient. So I think the activity itself helps like get like very self-motivated people because they're really to the goal, and then we do that. I mean, growth helps. I mean, the fact that we're expanding all over on a global scale. People get super energized and excited about that. And the other thing is we spend a lot of time actually articulating our values as a company. And we've done that from the ground up, right? So we've done that with bringing all the employees together and thinking of like, okay, what are we? What do we want to do? And how do we define the values of BlaBlaCar? And we came up with like 10 values. I won't list all the values, but we came up with like 10 different values that really encapsulate all the different teams. And we live by it. And when we go to party about it, and we do all hands meetings every week with the teams. And I think once like your values actually make sense with the goal of your company and what you do, people see that and you take a lot of motivation.
So almost intertwine the two. You should cultivate the values that you're pushing out.
Exactly, and you need to make sure it comes from the team essentially. So I don't think you can just say, okay, the values of the company are going to be X, Y, Z, and hope it can happen. So you realize that it's kind of it's kind of a slow exercise to realize that actually the people we attract tend to be entrepreneurial, they tend to change the world, they value social change, the environment, but also they have this global ambition. So we are like very international people. I mean, most people speak like 2, 3, sometimes 4 languages. So yeah, not bad, but such a requirement for Europe in a way, because you end up very multilingual. And so we foster that. We formulated some values around that, and then we live by those values.
So I want to end with something very exciting for you. Word around the street is BlaBlaCar is the next billion-dollar company in France. Not a bad prediction. Aside from going public and having that international expansion, personally, Nicholas, what's your biggest dream for the company? When will you know that you've achieved success?
That's a very good question. I think for the founding team, what's been exciting is we don't see the ceiling, right? So you keep growing, you keep innovating. And when you create a market, I mean, it could have been that actually it was like just a niche company in France where you have like 500,000 people actually using that between a few cities, and that was it. And today we don't see the ceiling. So speaking for myself, but I think for the other 2 co-founders, I don't think we have a goal per se. I don't think we can say like, okay, we need to reach that, and that would be that would be achievement. So I think it's like obviously it's like a series of achievements. And the fact that today we pretty much in every country in Europe, if I look back compared to 3 years ago, yeah, it's a super achievement. But then I realize that, oh, geez, we're still growing really fast, and the rest of the world actually is not even tapped, and we could do so many other things actually around the activity and the key. So to me, I almost hope that we'll keep growing, not seeing the ceiling. Future, and we say that's the goal. I mean, the goal is almost not to have a goal, and just to not to see a ceiling is the goal.
I think that's probably one of the best ways I've ever heard it put, and I love how you said, although you don't see the ceiling, you still have tangible action goals. So you focus on different markets at a certain time, so it's not, we're going to be the biggest company ever, but no one's really doing anything to get there.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, you need to celebrate milestones, right? So we've done that. Initially, we were doing that like every million member, and then we stopped because it was too often. But so it's good to have like these milestones where you say, hey, as a team, let's just celebrate because we said we would do that, and yeah, we've done it. And but what's great is to say, okay, now you look ahead and you realize there's so much more we can do, and you keep going and you keep going. So and I think most great companies have really been built this way. I mean, from the founding team to the employees, where essentially you don't see the ceiling, you keep pushing, you keep innovating, you keep disrupting. And it takes you to, typically like a pretty successful company.
I think if you guys go back to the celebrating every time you get a new member, I'm going to jump ship and come work for you guys, because we'll be having a party every day.
Yeah, every member will be like every other second, but even every million is going to get pretty often. So.
That's great. Can we end, Nicholas, with you telling our users how they can learn more about BlaBlaCar and start using the service?
Yeah, so today the service is live pretty much all over Europe and Russia. It's not, we don't operate in the US or in Americas in general. So for anyone in Europe or in Russia, BlaBlaCar.com or your country, so FRDA or whatever, and people can, if you're a driver, you can go post your ride. If you're a passenger, you can start traveling with us. And it's just as simple as that, right?
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks.